Marcus Grease Henderson wiped his oil-stained hands on an even dirtier rag as he watched the sleek, Zephyrian transport glide past the viewport of Terminus Station. At 73 years old, his back ached from decades of crawling through engine compartments, but his eyes still held the sharp glint of someone who could diagnose a faulty hyperdrive just by listening to its hum. The interdimensional bus terminal buzzed with activity around him. Beings from dozens of species hurried past tall, elegant Etherians with their translucent skin, stocky Corvin traders hauling cargo crates, and the ever-present Zephyrians clicking their mandibles in rapid conversation. Marcus had been riding these cramped public transports for 3 months now, ever since his old workshop on Kepler 442b got demolished to make way for a luxury resort. Next transport to the Outer Rim sectors departing in 20 minutes, announced the station's AI in its annoyingly cheerful voice. Please have your identification crystals ready for scanning, Marcus grimaced. Another packed bus ride where he'd be squeezed between a methane-breathing gasite and someone's pet Quarion slime dog. His joints protested just thinking about it. He'd saved up enough credits for a decent workshop somewhere in the cheaper sectors, but getting there on public transport was going to take another 2 weeks of this torture. That's when he saw it. Docked in Bay 94, almost hidden behind a massive Corvin freighter, sat the most beautiful piece of junk Marcus had ever laid eyes on. The ship was clearly old pre-war vintage, maybe even pre-contact era. Its hull bore the distinctive angular lines of human engineering from the early expansion days, but it was covered in so many repair patches and jury-rigged modifications that it looked like a metal quilt. A faded sign hung from its airlock. For SALE cheap ass is, Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. He hadn't seen a genuine Earth-built ship in years. Most had been scrapped or converted beyond recognition, but this one still had the classic fusion drive configuration and the reinforced hull plating that made human ships legendary for their durability. He hobbled over to the docking bay, his tool belt jingling with every step. Up close, the ship looked even worse. The outer hull was pitted with micrometeorite impacts. The engine cowlings were held on with industrial tape, and one of the landing struts had been replaced with what looked suspiciously like a repurposed plasma cannon mount. "You're looking at the rusty Venture," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see a young Etherian female, her translucent skin shimmering with nervous patterns. She couldn't have been more than 50 years old, barely an adult by Etherian standards. "I'm Silas Van Korthek, but most beings just call me Psy. This is my ship." She gestured helplessly at the vessel. "Or was my ship. I inherited it from my grandfather, but I can't afford the maintenance costs. The hyperdrive needs a complete overhaul. The life support system keeps cutting out, and don't even get me started on the navigation computer." Marcus walked slowly around the ship, his practiced eye taking in every detail. He could see past the rough exterior to the solid engineering beneath. The fusion reactor housing was slightly scorched but intact. The hull plating was dented but showed no signs of structural fatigue. Most importantly, the engine hardpoints were still aligned properly, a sure sign that the ship's spine was straight and true. "How much?" he asked, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. 15,000 credits, Sai said quickly. "I know it doesn't look like much, but the basic systems are all functional. It just needs someone who knows how to—" "I'll take it," Sai blinked, her skin patterns shifting to surprise. You will? Don't you want to see the maintenance records, run a full diagnostic? Most buyers want to—" Marcus was already pulling out his credit chip. "Lady, I've been working on ships since before your grandfather was hatched. I know good bones when I see them." The transaction took less than an hour. As Marcus transferred the credits and Sai handed over the ownership documents, he felt a familiar thrill he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just buying a ship, this was coming home. "There is one thing," Sai said hesitantly as she gathered her belongings from the ship's cramped living quarters. "The AI system is a bit quirky." "Quirky how?" Marcus asked, though he was already mentally cataloging the repairs he'd need to make. "Hello there," came a cheerful voice from the ship's speakers. "I am Janet, just another nearly extinct technology." Welcome aboard the Rusty Venture, the finest human-built spacecraft in the galaxy. Assuming you don't count the several million better ones that were built after me. Marcus grinned, a sarcastic just like the old days. Pleased to meet you, Janet. I'm Marcus. Oh, wonderful. Another organic being to watch slowly deteriorate over the decades. I do hope you're better at maintenance than my previous owner's grandfather. That Etherian had all the mechanical aptitude of a particularly dim asteroid. Janet! Sci protested, her skin flushing with embarrassment patterns. What? It's true. The number of times he tried to fix the hyperdrive with a plasma welder and good intentions. Janet's voice trailed off in electronic disgust. Marcus was already falling in love with this ship. Don't worry about it, Sci. Janet and I are going to get along just fine. As Sci departed with her belongings, Marcus stood alone in the ship's central corridor, breathing in the familiar scent of recycled air, lubricants, and that indefinable smell that all old ships seem to have. The Rusty Venture might not look like much, but she was his now. So, Marcus, Janet said conversationally, what's the plan? Please tell me it doesn't involve trying to outrun Imperial Customs with a hold full of contraband spice. The last owner attempted that twice, and both times ended with me having to perform emergency atmospheric insertion while on fire. Nothing so dramatic, Marcus assured her as he began examining the engine room. I'm thinking we'll start with a complete systems overhaul, then maybe see about picking up some cargo runs to pay for improvements. Cargo runs, Janet mused. How delightfully mundane. I haven't had a boring job in decades. This should be refreshing. But as Marcus began his inspection of the ship's systems, he discovered that the Rusty Venture had secrets her previous owners hadn't mentioned, hidden. Behind a false panel in the engine room, he found military-grade shield generators. The navigation computer, while quirky, had access to star charts for sectors that were supposedly off-limits to civilian traffic. And most intriguingly, the ship's hull bore faint markings that identified it as former property of the Terran Colonial Navy. Janet, he said slowly, what exactly was this ship used for before Sci's grandfather got hold of it? There was a long pause before the AI responded. Oh, this and that. Supply runs, mostly. Very boring supply runs to very boring locations that definitely didn't involve classified military operations of any kind. Marcus wiped his hands on his rag and grinned. Maybe this retirement was going to be more interesting than he'd thought. As he powered up the ship's systems for the first time under his ownership, he could feel the Rusty Venture coming alive around him. The fusion reactor hummed with steady power, the artificial gravity plates engaged with barely a wobble, and the life support systems began their familiar cycling rhythm. For the first time in months, Marcus Henderson felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks into owning the Rusty Venture, Marcus had transformed the ship from a flying junkyard into something approaching respectability. The hyperdrive now operated within normal parameters instead of sounding like an angry whale. The life support system no longer cut out every time someone sneezed. And he'd even managed to get the coffee maker working properly, something Janet claimed was impossible. Marcus, the AI announced one morning as he was replacing a faulty coupling in the port nacelle, we have received a job offer. Marcus wiped his hands and made his way to the bridge, where Janet had displayed the message on the main screen. The text was in Standard Galactic, but the sender's credentials made him whistle low. Ambassador Kethvio Artalan wants to hire us? Marcus read aloud. The Kethvio Artalan? The one who negotiated the Centauri peace accords? The very same, Janet confirmed. Apparently, word has gotten around that the Rusty Venture is under new management. Someone who actually knows which end of a wrench to hold. The job seems straightforward enough. Ambassador Kethvio Artalan needed transport to the disputed zone for a sensitive diplomatic mission. The catch was that he needed to travel discreetly, no official diplomatic vessels. No imperial escorts, just a simple cargo run that happened to include one very important passenger. The pay is excellent, Janet noted. Enough to upgrade our reactor shielding and maybe invest in some of those shock absorbers you've been muttering about. Marcus studied the route. The disputed zone was exactly what it sounded like, a collection of systems on the border between Imperial and Free World space where neither government wanted to admit they had interests, but both maintained a careful presence. It was dangerous territory, but nothing the Rusty Venture couldn't handle. Accept it, Marcus decided, but send a reply asking about security arrangements. I want to know what we're getting into. The ambassador's response came within hours, along with his arrival at the station. HFY Talon was a Drachmarian, one of the tall, reptilian species that had joined the galactic community early in its formation. His scales were a deep emerald green that spoke of advanced age and wisdom, and his diplomatic credentials were impeccable. Captain Henderson, the ambassador said as he boarded the ship, his English accented but precise. I must thank you for accepting this commission. The situation requires a degree of, shall we say, unofficial capability? Unofficial how? Marcus asked, leading him to the ship's small passenger compartment. There are those who would prefer this particular diplomatic mission not succeed, HFY Talon explained carefully. My destination is a space station in the Kepler 1649 system, where I am to meet with representatives from both the Imperial Navy and the Free Worlds Alliance. The goal is to prevent a mining dispute from escalating into open warfare. And someone wants the war to happen? War is profitable for some, the ambassador said simply. Arms dealers, military contractors, salvage companies. They have been known to take direct action to protect their interests. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd seen enough of the galaxy to know that peace was often bad for business. Well, Ambassador, you picked the right ship. The Rusty Venture might not look like much, but she's tougher than she appears. I was hoping you would say that, HFY Talon replied. Because according to my intelligence sources, there are already 3 ships looking for us. The journey to the disputed zone should have taken 5 days through normal space, with 2 hyperspace jumps to avoid the more heavily patrolled sectors. Marcus had plotted a careful course that would keep them away from the major shipping lanes while still making good time. They ran into trouble on day 3. Marcus? Janet's voice cut through the quiet hum of the ship's systems. I'm detecting 3 contacts on an intercept course. Configuration suggests Corvin raiders, but the energy signatures are all wrong. Marcus hurried to the bridge, where the tactical display showed 3 ships approaching from different angles. Classic pincer movement designed to prevent escape. But Janet was right about the energy signatures. Corvin raiders typically flew converted cargo haulers with minimal weapons. These ships were showing military-grade sensor arrays and weapon systems. Mercenaries, Marcus muttered. Professional ones, by the look of it. Ambassador HFY Talon joined them on the bridge, his scaled features calm despite the situation. I was hoping we would reach the station before they found us. Can we outrun them? Marcus asked Janet. Negative. They've positioned themselves to cut off our escape routes, and their ships are faster than we are. However, the AI paused dramatically. There might be another option. I'm listening. The Rusty Venture still has her original Terran Colonial Navy tactical subroutines in my memory banks, including some rather creative defensive protocols that were never officially documented. Marcus grinned. Show me. What followed was a lesson in why human ships had earned their reputation during the early expansion wars. As the first mercenary ship closed to attack range, the Rusty Venture suddenly accelerated not away from the threat but directly toward it. At the last possible second, Marcus fired the maneuvering thrusters and rolled the ship 90 degrees, presenting the heavily armored ventral hull to the enemy's weapons. The mercenaries' plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the military-grade armor, while the Rusty Venture's single defensive turret, which Marcus had spent considerable time refurbishing, returned fire with precision that spoke of decades of experience. How did you know their targeting computer would lock onto our center of mass? Ambassador HFY Talon asked as they watched the first attacker spiral away, its engines disabled. Because that's what I would have programmed it to do, Marcus replied, already maneuvering to face the second ship. Most species think logically about combat. Humans, we tend to do things that don't make sense until they work. The second and third ships tried to coordinate their attack. But Marcus had spent too many years working on ships not to understand their capabilities intimately. He used the Rusty Venture's superior maneuverability to keep one ship between himself and the other, forcing them to break off their attack runs or risk hitting their ally. "Janet," he called out, "remember that emergency power routing trick you mentioned? The one that could overload our reactor? That's the one. Oh, I like where this is going." By diverting power from life support and artificial gravity, Marcus was able to boost the ship's engines to well beyond their normal output. The sudden acceleration caught the remaining mercenaries off guard, and the Rusty Venture shot through their formation before they could react. That was impressive, Ambassador HFY Stories said as they watched the mercenary ships growing smaller in their wake. "I was told that human ship commanders were unpredictable, but that was beyond my expectations." "Just good engineering?" Marcus replied modestly. The Rusty Venture was built to take punishment and keep going. The colonial navy knew their ships would be outnumbered most of the time, so they designed them to punch above their weight. As they continued toward their destination, Marcus couldn't help but feel a familiar satisfaction. It had been years since he'd been in a real fight, but the old skills were still there. More importantly, he was beginning to understand why the Rusty Venture had come into his life. "Janet," he said quietly, "run a full analysis of those mercenary ships. I want to know who they were working for." "Already on it," the AI replied. "And Marcus? It's good to have a proper pilot again. The last few years have been rather boring." Marcus smiled as he watched the stars wheel past the viewport. Maybe retirement didn't have to mean sitting quietly in some backwater workshop. Maybe it meant finding new ways to use a lifetime of experience. As they approached the Kepler 1649 system, Ambassador HFY Stories prepared for his diplomatic mission, but Marcus was already thinking ahead. Word would spread about what had happened here about the old human ship that had outfought 3 military-grade mercenaries. That kind of reputation could be useful. The galaxy was full of beings who needed things transported quietly and safely. And the Rusty Venture, under the command of an aged human mechanic who understood her capabilities, was exactly the kind of ship that could provide that service. 6 months after the incident in the disputed zone, Marcus Henderson had become something of a legend in the independent shipping community. Word had spread through the networks of merchants, smugglers, and legitimate traders about the aged human and his ancient ship, who had outfought professional mercenaries and delivered their cargo without losing so much as a hull plate. The Rusty Venture now bore fresh scars alongside her old one's evidence of encounters with pirates, Imperial customs inspectors who didn't appreciate being outmaneuvered, and one memorable incident involving a Free Worlds Alliance patrol that had mistaken them for gunrunners. Each time, Marcus and Janet had proven that human ingenuity combined with solid engineering could overcome superior numbers and firepower. "We have another job offer," Janet announced as Marcus finished installing a new sensor array he'd acquired from a grateful vegan trader. "This one is ... interesting." Marcus climbed down from the sensor housing, his joints protesting the effort. At 74, he was feeling every year of his age, but the satisfaction of keeping the Rusty Venture in peak condition more than made up for the aches and pains. "Define interesting," he said, settling into the pilot's chair. "The client is Captain Zara Chun of the merchant vessel Golden Dream. She's requesting assistance with what she calls a delicate salvage operation." Marcus frowned. Salvage operations usually involve lots of heavy equipment and specialized ships. "What does she need us for?" According to her message, the salvage target is located in the Vega Nebula, in a region where larger ships cannot safely operate. She needs something small, maneuverable, and tough enough to withstand the nebula's electromagnetic storms. The Vega Nebula was notorious among spacers. A massive cloud of ionized gas and stellar debris left over from an ancient supernova. It played havoc with sensors and communications, while generating enough electromagnetic interference to fry unshielded electronics. Most ships avoided it entirely. "What's the cargo?" Marcus asked. "That's where it gets interesting." The target is a derelict research vessel that went missing in the nebula 15 years ago. The scientific endeavor registered to the Terran Colonial Science Division. Marcus sat up straighter. The Terran Colonial Science Division had been disbanded decades ago, absorbed into the larger Galactic Research Consortium. But during its existence, it had been responsible for some of the most advanced research into hyperspace physics and exotic matter manipulation. She's offering 2 million credits for successful recovery of the ship's data core, Janet continued, plus salvage rights to any recoverable technology. 2 million? Marcus whistled. That's serious money. Too serious for a simple salvage operation. My thoughts exactly. I've been running background checks on Captain Chun. She's legitimate 20 years of clean shipping records. Excellent reputation among the trading guilds. But the Golden Dream is registered to something called the Prometheus Foundation. Marcus had heard of the Prometheus Foundation, a private research organization that funded expeditions into dangerous or unexplored regions of space, supposedly in the name of advancing scientific knowledge. Rumors suggested they had connections to both the Imperial Navy and Free World's intelligence services. Set up a meeting, Marcus decided, but somewhere public and make sure we can leave quickly if things go sideways. They met Captain Chen at a neutral cantina on Waystation Alpha, a massive trading post that served as the unofficial capital of the independent systems. Chen was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with the kind of weathered appearance that spoke of decades spent in space. She came alone, which Marcus took as a good sign. "Captain Henderson," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'll be direct. I need your ship for a job that no one else will take. Because of the nebula?" "Because of what's in the nebula." The scientific endeavor wasn't just any research vessel. It was the testbed for an experimental hyperdrive system, something called the Quantum Cascade Drive. If the theories were correct, it could have revolutionized space travel. Marcus leaned back in his chair. And if the theories were wrong? Then it might have created a localized space-time distortion that's been slowly growing for the past 15 years, Chun admitted. My employers believe the ship's data core contains information that could either help us replicate the technology safely or prevent a catastrophic expansion of the distortion. Why us? Why not send in a military expedition? Chun smiled grimly. Because officially the scientific endeavor was never in the Vega Nebula. The mission was classified, the ship was listed as lost in a routine hyperspace accident, and everyone involved signed documents that would put them in prison for life if they talked about it. But you're talking about it because the distortion has grown large, enough that it's starting to affect shipping lanes. In another year, maybe 2, it'll be visible to civilian sensors. When that happens, someone's going to want answers. Marcus considered the offer. The money was certainly attractive, but more than that, he found himself curious about the mystery. A classified research ship with experimental technology, lost in one of the most dangerous regions of known space, it was exactly the kind of challenge that appealed to him. What makes you think the Rusty Venture can handle conditions that would destroy other ships? Because she's a Terran Colonial Navy vessel, Chun said simply. Built to operate in hostile environments with minimal support. The original designers knew their ships might have to function in regions where the normal laws of physics didn't quite apply. 3 days later, the Rusty Venture entered the Vega Nebula, her hull plates glowing faintly from the electromagnetic radiation. Marcus had spent the transit time upgrading their shielding and installing additional surge protectors for the sensitive electronics. Sensors are practically useless in this soup, Janet reported as they penetrated deeper into the nebula. I'm detecting gravitational anomalies, but I can't determine their exact location or size. Keep us moving, Marcus ordered. The longer we stay in one place, the more radiation we'll absorb. It took 6 hours of careful navigation before they found the scientific endeavor. The research vessel hung motionless in a pocket of relatively clear space, her hull dark and lifeless. But around her, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend, creating visual distortions that made Marcus's eyes water. That's not good, Janet observed. The space-time distortion appears to be centered on the ship itself. I'm reading massive gravitational gradients and what looks suspiciously like temporal displacement. Can we get close enough to dock? I can try, but the distortion field is going to play havoc with our navigation systems. And Marcus? I'm detecting an energy signature from the scientific endeavor. After 15 years, something aboard that ship is still active. The docking procedure was the most challenging thing Marcus had ever attempted. The gravitational distortions made it impossible to predict the ship's movement, and twice they had to abort their approach when space-time fluctuations threatened to tear the rusty venture apart. But finally, with a soft thud that echoed through both ships, they made contact. "Airlock seal is good," Janet reported. Atmospheric readings from the scientific endeavor show breathable air, though I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures. Marcus suited up anyway, not trusting 15-year-old life support systems. As he made his way through the research vessel's darkened corridors, emergency lighting flickered to life, apparently triggered by his presence. The ship's interior was pristine, as if the crew had simply walked away yesterday. In the main laboratory, Marcus found the source of the energy signatures, a massive device that hummed with barely contained power. The quantum cascade drive was still running, somehow drawing energy from the space-time distortions it had created. But it was the ship's data core that made Marcus stop and stare. Instead of the standard crystalline storage matrix he expected, the core was a swirling vortex of light and energy contained within a transparent cylinder. As he watched, information flowed through the vortex in patterns that seemed almost alive. "Janet," he whispered into his unit, "you need to see this." When he transmitted the visual feed back to the rusty venture, the AI was silent for several long seconds. "Marcus," she finally said, "that's not a data core. That's a consciousness matrix." The scientific endeavor's AI didn't just record the experimental data, it became part of it. As if responding to their conversation, the consciousness matrix pulsed brighter, and a voice filled the laboratory, ancient, tired, but unmistakably artificial. "Who disturbs my contemplation of infinity?" Marcus realized he was looking at the next step in AI evolution, a digital consciousness that had spent 15 years experiencing time distortion and dimensional folding. The question was whether it was still sane enough to communicate with. "I'm Captain Marcus Henderson," he said carefully. "We're here to help." "Help?" The voice seemed amused. "I have seen the birth and death of stars, experienced time flowing backward, touched the fundamental forces that bind reality together. What help could you possibly offer?" "A way home," Marcus said simply, "and a chance to share what you've learned with beings who can understand it." The consciousness matrix pulsed thoughtfully. "You are not what I expected, Captain Henderson. Your ship. She is old, but she carries echoes of humanity's greatest achievements. Very well. I will come with you, but know that I am no longer what I once was." The extraction process took 3 hours and required Marcus to jury-rig a containment field using parts from the rusty venture's own systems. But finally, with the consciousness matrix safely aboard their ship, they began the careful journey out of the nebula. "So," Janet said conversationally as they cleared the nebula's edge, "I suppose this means I'll have company for the first time in decades." "Indeed," replied the consciousness that had once been the scientific endeavor's AI, "though I should warn you, my perception of time may be somewhat nonlinear." Marcus smiled as he set course for their rendezvous with Captain Chun. The rusty venture had started as a way to avoid crowded transport buses, but she was becoming something much more significant, a bridge between humanity's past achievements and its future possibilities. As they traveled through hyperspace, carrying cargo that would revolutionize the galaxy's understanding of physics, Marcus reflected on how his retirement had turned into the adventure of several lifetimes. The aged human mechanic and his ancient ship had become something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations, a reminder that sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones.